This month marks the anniversary, by the way, in 1995. That's why we have the birthday cake of MTCO's first regular monthly service. It was on the 5th of February in that year. We knew then, and we're still definitely sailing into uncharted waters. Our idea, though, was very simple: to create a church just like the other churches and just like the experience of church that we had had earlier in our lives. Mike Sullivan and I and our partners, but without the superstition that we figured we could do without the theology, without the supernatural doctrines, and without the have faith and the don't ask questions, and worst of all, the idea that questioning and doubting is a sign of you having moral problems. How many are familiar with that, by the way? Okay, you've heard about that, right? So this is what they do. Many believers say of us, in fact, that atheists are, we're the way we are because we want to be evil and do evil things and not have to account to God. So many believers who ask their religious leaders, this is partly what they experience too, if they just ask a question. That's not a clear answer, that they can't just, shake hands and say, oh, what a great thing that God is, praise God. They say that you must be in sin, or you're being tempted by the devil. And of course, you can always find some kind of sin, right? Nobody's perfect, they're always saying that. I think we really should have some pity for people who look at things that way. Again, it's not working too sound. As I say, the idea of the NTCOF was to do away with all that, focus on what, as freethinkers, rationalists, and humanists, that we do think is important and worth believing and believing in. We did not know how it would go, we did not know how it would work, and we had serious concerns even about what we would do, what our services would be like, and that's one of the most common questions that people ask when they contact us. Well, what are your services like? What the heck do you do? We worried whether there would be sufficient material that would be sufficiently interesting to get people like us to roll out of bed on a Sunday morning, and especially whether there would be enough support to keep it going. What we did know is that organizations like the Freedom from Religion Foundation and the American Humanist Association, that they had annual conventions that were not money losers. They were well attended and featured presentations on religious skepticism, atheism, and state-church separation. Well, to make things easier on ourselves, we hired a local actor to present a dramatization of Thomas Henry Huxley's famous Letter to Kingsley. If you don't know what that is, look it up on our website, it's there. That way, we didn't have to spend a whole hour pontificating like I usually do. Hopefully it's not too oppressive, otherwise you all wouldn't show up. So, as I said, that's on our website. The actor who we hired to do this, by the way, when he found out what we were about, he tried to back out. At the last minute, too, but we were able to persuade him to appeal to his Christian morality, really more to his professional ethics, by asking if, as an actor, couldn't you mean you can't play a character that you think is disgusting or not a good person? So he agreed, he went through with it, and I think he did a good job. He appeared in kind of a faux 19th century attire and affected a British accent. It was really quite entertaining. Well, it turned out after that, even without demanding membership dues, that we were able to pay the bills, although Mike and our families had to kick in some additional funds during the first year, at the end of the first year. More importantly, we did not run out of things to talk about. They were entertaining, interesting, and by turns funny and inspiring. In fact, I don't think we ever could run out of material. There's just so much of it everywhere. Much of it, of course, is taken from current events and other things going on in culture and society. Our 2001 service, I remember, was very funny. We had John was, both our Johns were there. Do you remember the obelisk that we did? Sort of like the 2001 Space Odyssey. We unveiled that and talked about, we worked that into the service in the beginning of the 2001 first service. Anyways, there's just tons of things from history, including the thoughts and writings of people like us. Other religious traditions have survived on a single book or other limited sacred writings, whereas we can draw on everything ever written, and more, things we can write ourselves. And this is just what we've done. Over time, we've come to wonder how on earth those other religious traditions have survived for so long on such a limited stock of ideas. How did they do it? No wonder that without the credible threat of being burnt alive in this life, let alone in the supposed afterlife, the traditional religions of the West have been tending to dwindle. It is amazing and not a little puzzling that they persist as well as they do, but that's the subject of our service today. Actually, another NTCOS service, we're going to touch on that a little bit. But you see what I mean about not running out of things for atheists to consider at church? Well, that's pretty boring to keep hitting that. If I sit down. Of course, everything we talk about, everything we do, has always had an underlying theme of thinking about religious questions. Put that in quotes, religious questions. Not, or at least not always, having to do with supernatural claims. Mainly, we found that we dealt with the problems of life, of thinking about what goes on around us, how we're situated in time, in history, in the context of our culture, society, our way of living, whether good, bad, or a mixture of the two. So it's been a conversation these last 24 years. We grew to appreciate that just as other churches participate in a marketplace of ideas, that people like us have something to contribute as well. And usually it is better and more important than that offered by those with a perspective of the traditional religious beliefs. We said from the beginning, we didn't just come by it on the way, that we would be a fillet of religion, the idea being to take out those hard bones that choke you that are in the other religious traditions. We said that our aim was religion done right. And that's why we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Religion done right. Think about that. And this had a lot to do with why, after giving it a lot of thought, we decided to go with and stick with using the word church. Over the last 24 years, it has become clear that these things are more true and more applicable. Sorry about that. More true and more applicable than we ever could have imagined. We'll talk more about that in a little while when we consider religion done right. So we have this birthday cake in the back. Should we take a break in that birthday cake, or should we save that for later? We did have some candles. We have candles that we lit up and then we put them out, but not by spitting on the cake. So, also, of course, you know, you can sing Happy Birthday now because since 2016 the thing has been off copyright and is now in the public domain. How many knew that it was copyright, right? Yeah, it was copyright for a long time. When you see TV shows, especially in the 20th century, they would only sing a few lines because if they sang the whole thing, it would violate the copyright. So I neglected to mention last month, sorry, that 2019 was designated by the United Nations as the International Year of the Periodic Table of the Chemical Elements. And with it, the 100th anniversary of the founding of the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry. So if you don't know what IUPAC does, you should know that, among other things, it determines the official names and rules for naming molecules. The United Nations Committee declared the periodic table of chemical elements is one of the most significant achievements in science, capturing the essence not only of chemistry, but also of physics and biology. Not even use it. You really don't need it.
Yeah, you don't need the speaker, you're coming.
Yeah, I'm not recording it anyway.
Do you know how many elements there are now?
I think they're up to what, 116 or something like that? Yeah. So we all recognize this distinctive shape of the periodic table. How many of us have? How many of you have a shirt like that? Come on. Oh my gosh, you're a bunch of heathens. You need to go out and get one. And you get one there at the at Amazon. If you got something to write down, you can even write down that link. By the way, anything you buy on Amazon, if you delete anything, whatever is after that DP number and that number, put a / and put North Texas Church, that gives us a tiny percentage of your purchase at no cost to you.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's what I do every time I buy something on Amazon. But if you don't have one of these shirts, or at least something, look, I got my tie on this morning, okay? If you don't have that, well, shame, shame. I have to walk you naked around the hotel. You can get ties, you can get scarves. You know, you don't want a t-shirt. They have nice scarves, they have socks,
Oh, you can have
shoes, mugs, lots of other swag displaying the periodic table. I think it's an icon of our religious down.
Oh, the tie looks good, doesn't it?
Did you know that Dmitry Mendeleev, the Russian chemist who invented the periodic table in 1869, 1869, now think about that, 150 years this year, but that's very late in human history. Think of all the people, including important people, great scientists, including Antoine Lavoisier, the father of chemistry, who lived and died before anyone had seen or known of this periodic table. By the way, this on the right here, that's his first draft of trying to organize the elements in a way.
How many are there?
I forget how many there were exactly at his time, but Mendeleev left gaps in his periodic table. And these were for elements that he theorized should exist. And he even predicted some of their properties. And he turned out to be right. They found gallium in 1875, scandium in 1879, germanium in 1886, rhenium, which they found in 1926, technetium found in 1937, and others. And of course, as you said, we're making additional super heavy elements today, and it's theorized that there's going to be an island. All these big heavy things are made to fall apart in a very fraction of a second. They're working on getting to what they consider maybe an island of stability, they call it, up around 120 or somewhere above 120. They figured that they should get some stable elements. In addition, once the periodic table was out there, it began to be asked why it has that shape. Ever think of that? It turned out that it has that shape because of quantum mechanics. So there's a ton of information here. There may well be clues to other things that no one has even recognized yet. And this illustrates something very important, not just in the sciences, but in our understanding generally and in life, and it is this: just theories, and the best of them especially, the organizing ideas and principles we learn and become familiar with, they lead to many new discoveries and improved understanding, which in turn, of course, leads to many other things. Very important bits and pieces of understanding, and therefore potential tools for improvement and progress, not just in the sciences, but in your everyday life. It depends, everything depends on knowing where to look, and it's the theories that often tell you, give you hints of that. And that depends on developing recognition skills, and they depend heavily on seeing how new things fit with old things and realizing that all these associations and connections mean something. Of course, there's a dark side. It's always a dark side, right, to everything. And it's a good subject for an entire church service sometime in the future. You see, it's always more. And I'm thinking of ideas and organizing principles that box people in and stymie growth and learning. They do the opposite of showing people where to look. They teach people not to look or to see everything they see as proving the theory. And that's, of course, how you tell the difference between good, useful theories that work until they don't work, and they're always subject to being undermined and replaced with something better. But the dark side theories aren't like that. Anything and everything proves those kinds of theories right, and I bet you can think of what some of those theories are. So here's our creed. We put it up every time. Agree or disagree, or if they're we don't demand a statement of faith, of course, but what we do require, what every single person ought to require themselves, is enough sanity to realize the beliefs, which is only where thinking leaves off. That's just when you stop thinking, park your thoughts, that's a belief. But they ought to be grounded in facts and reason. So we put the most effort into our monthly service. I don't know if you could tell that or not. Each of them is different, and we've had many very good ones, of which we hope today's is one. We once wondered, like I said, whether we'd ever run out, but we don't. So please let us know how we're doing and how we might do it better. Even better, help us do it better. Deanna came in today and said, I've got a little reading I can do. And I said, we'll do it, but just not today because we've already got it all kind of planned out. But maybe there'll be time at the end. But if you come across things that are interesting, you want to present, this is kind of like our Toastmasters. We can, if you don't like public speaking, then don't, of course, but if that's something that you want to add to things, then you're never going to have a more friendly audience than we are here. We have these other things that go on. Most of you here know about game night at the IHOP at I-35 or Northwest Highway on Friday nights, and on non-first Sundays of the month we have our salon. I think our next week we're going to have, maybe not, I wouldn't call it a business meeting, but we're going to talk about some of the business of the church and where we go in the future. I think it's a good occasion for that. One thing I've been thinking of is, you remember when Christelle Manning came in November and she was introduced by Gordon Melton. Gordon Melton is a famous, he's a tremendous resource in sociology of religion. He's interested in all these cults and things. He's down in Waco. He moved there from California, where he had moved from Illinois. He's written all kinds of books and articles. He's presented on us at some international meetings talking about new religious movements.
He's also a cool guy, he's interested in vampires and werewolves and things. It'd be great to have him come up and talk to us about maybe that whole Waco business. I haven't picked his brain what he knows about jihadism, but there's a lot of subjects he could talk to us about, but we really should not invite him up without offering him an honorarium of some few hundreds of dollars and pay his way. But for that, we need contributions. So remember that when I thank for contributions later too. I mean, there are great things we can do. Gordon Melton's really getting pretty long in the tooth too. I mean, who knows how much longer he'll be available to us. But his being so close in Waco, and I talked to Will, who said that he'd be glad to put Will up in his house, put Gordon up in his house, which of course saves costs. So keep that in mind. By the way, when you come to the salon, the food goes away at 10:30, but if you get there early, you can eat and just pay at the front desk. What was it, 15? It's about $20. If you get here before they put the food away at 10 o'clock, you can have, it's a pretty limited menu, but the general manager told me $5, and you can have eggs and sausage and cold cereal and things that they have here. So a lot of this is on the back page of the bulletin. It's also available on our website. And as I say, we can always do so much more, but it takes people to do it. If you have an idea, even just for a one-off, some movie that you want to go see, there's this new one out on Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You've already seen it though, kids. So, but there's all kinds of little things we could plan to do. Let the church help facilitate that. We always need volunteers. We don't have any kids today, but Kid here and Merlin, who can raise their hands if they don't mind getting spotted out, they will help us with the kid care when we have kids, and you can encourage other people to bring their children. And of course, we have a child, but he's already smart enough to be able to understand everything we talk about, and we don't talk about anything disgusting.
It's an honorary adult.
He's an honorary adult freethinker. Aaron Kelton is not here, but he helps us maintain our social media presence. John Hendricks, where did you sit? Now there he is in the back. Where are you in the back, John? Brings all the equipment and so forth, and that is just a tremendous help, and without that, really would not be able to do a good service. So just think about, give it some thought, and help us do religion right. So we have a really kind of cool moment of science today, eDNA. Now you can be forgiven if you think eDNA is DNA on the internet or your cell phone or something, electronic, but actually the E refers to environmental DNA. The structure of DNA and the mechanism of its being the agent of life's ability to replicate was only first discovered 1953. That's how short it's been, famously by James Watson and Francis Crick. We ought to shut that door back there. Getting to be more annoying than the little microphone thing. So now, 66 years later, everyone knows that DNA can be extracted from such things as specks of blood, hairs, old bones, and tiny amounts of saliva that people leave on drinking glasses. That's because DNA is in all our cells, and as living beings go about, bits of their cells are falling off all the time. Now just think of where you've been, what you've been doing. Everywhere you've been leaving a trail of your DNA, like a snail leaving a slimy trail. And these bits of DNA persist in the environment, at least for a while. It's theorized at least about 24 hours. Welcome, newcomer.
Thank you.
We don't have time to love bomb you right now, but we will later. We want to adopt you into our cult. But you can detect this material, this environmental DNA, and match it to who or what it is, who it came from, that they've been there. Imagine now the applications of such a simple and non-invasive way of monitoring organisms, living things. This past November, the first U.S. conference on eDNA was held in New York. A report was issued by the scientists attending the event, and they called for this technology to be used more widely as a highly accurate and inexpensive way to track, for example, to track marine animals without actually sighting them or having to attack trackers and so on. And of course, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration is involved in some of this, so that's what they're recommending that they do. Here's a short video. It's from Australia, so you will recognize the platypus. Computer slow. I said that earlier too, so if anybody has an old laptop, they would like to donate to the church. Oh, no, we don't have the speaker plugged in.
Oh.
Can you do that real quickly? It's in the little sack with the, where the monitor is. Only take a moment. Sorry, we're not as polished as those mega churches and things. That goes into the line.
It's been a long time. I've been a while, but I've been coming to the weekly thing. Go to
Sundays?
game night. Yeah, Sundays. I tried to keep like some of those games under control.
Playing the game, yeah, very competitive.
Yeah.
We can detect every living thing. We now can thanks to environmental DNA, or eDNA for short. All creatures leave traces of DNA in their surrounding environment, via skin cells, hair, scales, anything really. And this is where the magic happens. Scientists have worked out how to extract this DNA from the environment and use it to identify the animal, plant or other organism that left it behind. We start in the field, collecting samples such as water from rivers, lakes, estuaries, dams, you name it. eDNA can also be found in terrestrial samples like soil. Next, the lab coat goes on and eDNA is extracted. The unique sequence of each DNA molecule is analysed for matches against a database of species. Once we get a single or multiple species match, bingo! We then map which species were found where. So from a simple sample, we can determine what is present within the broader environment, making the often invisible visible, making the cryptic species easy to find, as we no longer need to see, hear or catch something. eDNA is a valuable tool for those working to protect our ecosystems. We can more easily monitor native species like the popular angling fish, the Murray cod. In the same way, we can monitor threatened species like the dwarf galaxis. We can also detect invasive species like disease-carrying mosquitoes that can enter Australia via our airports and shipping ports. By efficiently and effectively identifying what is present in our environment, eDNA is revolutionising how we manage and protect Australia's fragile biodiversity. If you would like to learn more, please get in contact with us at EnviroDNA. We are a team of passionate eDNA scientists who would love to help.
Pretty cool, huh? So whatever else you can say, you learned something at church today.
I wonder,
Yeah.
has anybody ever experimented or have any information on whether engines can be patterned by their exhaust the same way as DNA pattern was?
Yeah, you'd think so, especially now that we have drones that can just fly around and when they fly into a trail of hydrocarbons, they know a plane has been there. Anyways, this is just fascinating. I mean, to think you go around sampling a bunch of, muck, water, whatever, and you know what's there. But now, the collection and analysis of eDNA not only is going to revolutionize the study of monitoring of ecosystems, tracking the populations, ranges, and movements of living things, it seems reasonable that this will eventually extend to human ecosystems. Remember there was something in the news recently where they found the Golden State Killer, right? By uploading unknown DNA sequences that they thought was the perpetrator to one of these public databases. And they found a match, so they could zero in on a family of people and see where they lived and who might be a suspect. But now imagine this, imagine having something in your home that allows you to know immediately who or what has been there while you were gone. When you might need to call the pest control people. Or when someone in your household has caught a virus, you know, the thing goes off, you're like, oh my gosh, who's getting sick? Time that we all get on the Tamiflu. And I'll leave it to your imagination as to how eDNA could be applied in other ways. So, think about that, huh?
Yeah. Years ago, when the computers first came out, and the advancement of computers, you know, it was said that once you make it easier for common people to use it, then it's successful. I think DNA is gonna go that way too. Once it becomes really easy for people to do this and put it in there, you've done, you know what's, or you can access to a database that has a catalog of all.
Somebody's gonna think of a cell phone.
It's gonna, yes, exactly. The easier for common people to use it, the more successful an application will be.
So this is pretty exciting stuff. So that was your moment of science. Now we move on. I got a lot of material here now. This is gonna challenge you, I think. Religion done right. And I put that Darwin fish up there for a reason. What's the point?
The fish walking, we can't, you know,
The point is, the fish with legs were an innovation.
Mhm.
Is this a fish? Is it a walking fish? It's not a land animal, it's a fish with feet. So, but it's change. Of course, change is always scary to some degree. The article in today's bulletin relates to this subject, and it's quite important, I think. It goes to the core of what was intended when the NTC Web was started. So if this is your first NTC Web service ever, this is the one to be at. It's fundamental to what this church is about. When near the close of every service, we have that quote of Gandhi, "Be the future you wish to see." This is what it means. We are the future that we wish to see. We deliberately use this word church, and by implication insist that our ideas and our values are as much religion as anyone's. And in fact, we presented in the past at the Supreme Court, having ruled that our beliefs, to the degree that they play a role in our lives as central as that of Christians and other believers, that it does qualify as religion. So don't let anybody tell you that your opinions don't matter because you don't have any religion. In fact, I think we have an even stronger claim to a word like that than those who use their religion to fight against well-established and important science, to promote pseudoscience, to attack human rights, and to terrorize and intimidate those who don't believe as they do, and all the other things that are clearly connected with traditional religions and their teachings. Even our horrible legacy of slavery, we talked about this in the past, grew out of biblical interpretations of the sons of Noah. Ham was cursed and all this nonsense. Because these are clearly terrible things, and whatever is used in service of such things, I mean, to say, oh, it's like if somebody uses a hammer, you don't call the hammer evil. Things that are used in the service of terrible things that's misuse and abuse. I constantly hear atheists, though, people I'm completely in agreement with on these matters, using words like religious and religion in a pejorative sense. And I understand why they do it. But, and here's the big but, that buys into the traditional religion's way of looking at things. It's playing their game and their rules in a very important sense. This is not how we should be looking at things. Consider that it said of atheists that we want to tear down religion without offering anything in its place. It's time that this charge be answered by taking religion away from believers, so to speak. They have had thousands of years to fix it, to make it right, and instead, despite some few improvements, it remains a complete mess. It's time to show by example that something actually good can be made of this idea by actually doing it. Not say, do. They won't do it, we must. Now, in the 19th century, the only medications that were good for anything that actually worked probably was opium. And this is why at an 1860 meeting of the Massachusetts Medical Society, physician Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., he was the father of the Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., he said this, he said, "I firmly believe that the whole materia medica, in other words, all the medications they had at that time, could be sunk, as now used," that's an important clause, "could be sunk to the bottom of the sea, and it would be better for mankind and all the worse for the fishes." Right, but did this guy reject the enterprise of medicine? No. He and others like him worked to improve it. They left behind the as now used to how we use it now. And so what they did is they fixed what was wrong.
And they did so without refusing to use the word medication, or as in this quote, materia medica. We still use that terminology today for all of our medications. And we must do the same. Of course, we absolutely must make the important distinctions that it's necessary to make. We certainly don't want to introduce confusion. We want to make it very clear that we reject theology and theological doctrines. We reject supernaturalism and superstition. We reject faith beliefs, beliefs based on no evidence or in the teeth of controverting facts. Some may worry that we'll be misunderstood if we say that our opinions are religion or religious, or that we attend church, and I say just the opposite is the case. Unless we make these important distinctions, it will be misunderstood, as we are already misunderstood, that we have no respectable core values, no coherent ideas having to do with how to be a real human being, as opposed to an animal behaving according to impulse and instinct, and most importantly, that we have no morality. I know you've all heard that. Now, I know very well that there are some huge obstacles between getting from where we are to a world where the superstition and supernaturalism has been stripped away from all the religions and churches. But the biggest obstacle may be the misconception, not just that believers have, but that we ourselves suffer from, and it has to do with how our brains work. What I mean by this is that if I say a word like circus, or I put some pictures up like this, immediately your brain opens up all sorts of associations and connections that it has stored away about that term. You can't help it. It just happens automatically. It's like you've got a little file clerk back there. Oh, circus, boom, here we got all this stuff. You think of elephants, clowns, trapeze artists, someone who sticks a sword down their throat or breathes fire, as well as cotton candy and popcorn. And not just pictures of those things, but the sounds and smells and tastes, and especially the emotions connected with whatever your past experiences have been with those things, and with whatever you may have heard, read about, or perhaps saw in a movie about circuses. That's what your brain does. It makes all these connections and associations. You just can't help but think in terms of these images and frames of reference, because it has to do with how the neurons in your brain are structured. And we know this from research that's been done on cognition. But that does not mean that you cannot, especially given some time, alter these connections and associations, expand them, and connect or associate them with other things as well. What if I suggested to you that you should consider that all of these things you hold in your consciousness about the term circus are really just a specific instance of a larger abstraction? The groups of neurons that have to do with circus can bind together with other neuron groups that have to do with what I just said, events that serve the same purpose or that are similar. How about any activity or assemblage of events where a lot of things are going on at once that are at the same time entertaining, but also perhaps sometimes scary, the jumping through hoops of fire and so forth? Things that play on your emotions and may cause you to cheer, cry, or even feel fear about what's going to happen. What if I said, this is the same thing? This is the same thing that goes on in politics, and news reporting about it is a kind of circus. Would you understand that? Well, initially your brain might resist it a little bit and think, oh, but politics is so much more important than simple entertainment. Politics profoundly affects our lives. It's not simply entertainment. It's important, right? And that's certainly true. But I'm not the first to make this comparison. You know that. And when I show you that it's a common meme, then you more readily make the connection. You know, I'm not trying to change your mind about something. Especially if I can show that the political figure or party that you dislike is the same as a circus clown. Then you realize that there is simply no denying the many resemblances of politics and the circus, the stage, hearings and events, the news outlets scrambling to get the scoop for the purpose of gaining viewers and getting ad revenue, and especially the constant and continual efforts, usually very successful, to evoke in you an emotional response. The point is that there are different ways of framing things, and there is tremendous value in being able to frame things in more than one way, to understand and evaluate things from more than one frame. That's how we understand each other. Too many people live their whole lives in just one small box. It's true with politics, and it is especially true when it comes to religion and church. Now remember what I said. This comes out of study of thought. We know a lot more about thinking than they did back in the Enlightenment when people wrote stuff about how important reason is. This is the 21st century. This is science, folks. We talked last month about AI. Computers do exceedingly well with image analysis, and artificial intelligence can be trained to recognize, for example, chairs. But if such a system is shown something like this here over on the right, you see this? The computer, these are all chairs. How about this? What the heck is that? And the artificial intelligence is going to have some trouble with that unless it's previously learned that that's a chair. But unlike a computer that's learned what a huge variety of chairs look like, your brains work differently. You can realize that the important question is not, does it look like a chair, but rather, is it something somebody could sit on? And the answer is yes, though it is still a bit weird and we would probably not be thrilled about sitting on it. So if we taught a computer that such a thing was also a chair, now how would the computer react if we showed it a picture of the exact same object, but it's got a 1 or 2 inch spike on the top of it, where someone would sit? You see what I'm getting at? In the same way now, think about church and religion. But disregard the way that believers think about church and religion as being all about their doctrines and dogmas of God and sin and heaven and hell and reincarnation and all that kind of stuff. I'm not telling you to forget everything you've learned and were taught, but just set it aside. Because that's probably how you learn the thing, but that doesn't mean you can't change the way you think. You're never going to change anything unless you do start with changing how you think. So ask instead what religion does. Not what it does that hurts people, but ask if it was going to do something helpful and good, what might that be? Set that as your task. Consider what purpose religion serves. Maybe you have to imagine that there are no heretics to burn and nonconformists to persecute. There's some island where everybody is physically the same and nobody dissents. What would you do if you were the Pope, for example? Announcing that Catholicism is a big fraud and not going to be useful? That's not going to be useful because they're just going to get rid of you and put somebody else in there, right? So really, realistic, what would you do if you wanted to affect change? Think about why religions persist, especially now when they can't burn heretics and punish people for noncompliance with their agenda. Why wasn't the materia medica of the 19th century simply abandoned? Why did it persist as an element of medical care, even though most of it was pernicious, and people knew that it was pernicious? So, consider what Ayn Rand, certainly an atheist, definitely an atheist, consider what she said of religion in an interview back in 1964. Of course, she's dead now, the famous person that wrote The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged and so forth. She said, "You must remember that religion is an early form of philosophy, that the first attempts to explain the universe, to give a coherent frame of reference to man's life, and a code of moral values were made by religion, before men graduated or developed enough to have philosophy." Now remember that science began with the ancient Greeks as philosophy. They even called it natural philosophy back then. As we know, science ultimately proved itself by far and away the superior way to make sense of the world. But science has an important limitation. Science can only make sense of the objective world, the things that we can perceive with our senses or that we can build machines to detect for us. Asperger's footnote. I always laugh when I hear believers saying, well, you should believe in God. This is for the same reason you believe in X-rays. They're both invisible. Right? How stupid is that? But is science everything? Thomas Henry Huxley didn't think so. Of course, it's unclear whether he thought consciousness was something that could be understood in the same way, using the same methods with which we understand matter and force. And let's remember that Huxley died in 1895, 10 years before Einstein deduced that matter and energy are equivalent. So matter and force, matter and energy, that's the same. So he said consciousness the third. But today the problem of consciousness remains inexplicable. And it seems more and more that it is a barrier that science simply cannot breach in the following way. At least once before in a service I shared this very interesting thought experiment known as Mary the Color Scientist. And it goes like this. How many remember that or have read about Mary the Color Scientist elsewhere? Okay, so this will be new too. Mary is a brilliant scientist whose entire existence has been in a black and white environment. She specializes in the neurophysiology of vision and acquires all the physical information about what goes on when we see ripe tomatoes or the sky, and when we use terms like red, blue, and so on. She knows all about different wavelengths of light, how they affect the retina, and how the signals from there are processed in the visual cortex, right down to any arbitrary degree of detail, atomic, quantum mechanics, however you want to think about that. And she understands how the speech and motor areas of the brain are then activated and send signals to the organs of speech, causing the utterance of words like the sky is blue.
So there's nothing about any of this that Mary is in ignorance of. There's nothing that she has any doubt about. But what will happen when Mary leaves her black and white world and steps out into a world of color? Does she learn anything? It may surprise you, but philosophers argue this. In fact, there's a whole book called, I think it's called The Problem with Mary. And yet, and the article in today's bulletin discusses this, there is, and this thought experiment illustrates it, a singular, internal, subjective, private, and personal, and really unique as any of us are, experience of, quote unquote, what it is like to have a specific conscious experience, such as seeing something, colored or not. There's an element of the experience of being oneself. And this experience is the one we live with at all times that we are aware of ourselves. It's always with us. It's not a part of the objective world with which science can consider. The experience of any and every emotion that it is possible as a human being to feel is not the same as any description of it, whether poetic or scientific, and if scientific, whether biological, neurochemical, whether in terms of molecular goings-on in your brain or even quantum mechanics. There are things that science can find that correlate with this. With qualia, as it is called by philosophers, this word qualia, but none of these are the same. Qualia, by the way, is a term first used in 1929. It's simply not something that science can get at. Philosopher and cognitive scientist Daniel Dennett, how many have heard of him? He's one of the four horsemen of atheism, right? He said that qualia is an unfamiliar term for something that could not be more familiar to each of us, the way things seem to us. Importantly, the way things seem to us, though it cannot by its nature be detected or measured, even in principle, by science, it is real. It's real to us in all of your experience. Not in the objective world is it real, but in our subjective experience it is. Color is just such an excellent example of this too, because color does not exist as an objective part of the world. You think color is out there? It's not. Remember the movie Matrix where Neo is training and the trainer guy says, you think that's air you're breathing? You know, because he's having a physical response? Because it's all taking place in his head in the computer. But that's where everything takes place in your head. Color is produced in our brain and by our brain. In some sense, we hallucinate it. In some sense, we hallucinate all of reality. Except there's some of it that just happens to correlate with what other people are experiencing too, and that's how we get science. But we cannot even know if one person's experience of color is the same as another's. Let me give you another example of a challenge to the idea that everything we can experience can be explained and represented by science. In the 1997 movie Contact, based on the book by Carl Sagan, how many have seen that movie? It's an excellent movie. If you haven't seen it, put it on your list. Based on a book by Carl Sagan, the atheist astronomer, Ellie Arroway, a character played by Jodie Foster, and a Christian apologist, Palmer Joss, played by Matthew McConaughey, have this exchange. Ellie says, so what's more likely, that an all-powerful, mysterious God created the universe and decided not to give any proof of his existence, or that he simply doesn't exist at all and that we created him so that we wouldn't have to feel so small and alone? And the Christian guy says, did you love your father? The scientist says, what? He says, your dad, did you love him? She says, yes, very much. And he says, prove it. You see what's happening here? Here's the Christian character equating facts about the objective world with subjective qualia. Too bad the scientist character didn't call him on it. Did Carl Sagan know better? I don't know. But this is exactly what we need to do when we see this sort of thing. Call them out. We have to draw these important distinctions between one and the other, because otherwise the confusion continues to work its harm. And it's not a matter of being argumentative, it's just a matter of inviting people to take a step back. Yes, that's an element of experience that is not science. You can agree with that. But it's not part of superstition either. So this is what religion is and ought to do. Deal with and make sense of qualia. Not pretend to know things about the objective world or some other reality beyond the world, as so many claim, something beyond space and time. Things that do not interact in any way with observable reality are, by definition, not part of our reality. one can imagine an infinite number of things for which there is both absence of evidence, but not evidence of absence. I know you all, many of you heard that too, as God believers often say. Therefore, to think about religion properly, we must get it straight in our heads that although many people think religion is all about gods and heaven and hell and reincarnation and all that, that their beliefs about what religion is, just like their beliefs in these supernatural things, are unfounded and wrong. Religion is about qualia, about that portion or element of our experience that is subjective. And though it may be similar from person to person, is unique to each person, private, and fundamentally unknowable to anyone else. Remember the Ellie Airways says, so you wouldn't feel so small and alone? But that's what the existentialists remind us of. We do feel small and alone because we are small and alone. But together, we can work on overcoming that. Now that science has given us the basic outline, read the top of that, of almost anything we can think of in the world in terms of objective reality, we just think about it. We really do know the basics on almost everything. But the part of our subjective experience that is intersubjective, the part that we notice other people can perceive as well as we can, it's time for people to stop, drop their many pretensions about religion, for there's something left for religion to do, which it needs to focus on and do a better job of doing than it ever has before, and without the distractions of supposing that in order to survive it has to fight against modern biology, persecute people who have certain sexual preferences or physical characteristics, or discourage the honest questions that anyone may have on anything. But at the same time that this ends the conflict between science and religion, like not just a truce, but here's the line. You're here, I'm there. It doesn't mean you can't comment on the other, but it's pretty clear that what I have often pointed out in past services too, the Cartesian divide between mind and body is really a divide between objective and subjective. It's really interesting to me too, because at the same time that this ends the conflict, it also kind of merges science and religion in a sense. I think I should get the Templeton Award. Because after all, people in the sciences have their own qualia. And those who love and do and teach science are motivated largely by their qualia, the qualia that they experience in doing what they do. Anybody know who Sean Carroll is? He's a physicist at Caltech. He calls himself a poetic naturalist. He's really talking about this, but he doesn't discuss it in these terms. He's not with the program, I should say. If he was a personal friend, I think I'd like to have a long discussion with him about that. I'd like to know where I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. I will add that framing things in this way also solves another difficult problem, and that is free will. There is no scientific, factual, or logical basis whatsoever for the idea that our behavior is not completely determined by the molecules in motion in our brains and bodies. None. And those who say otherwise are simply not thinking right. Objectively, we are robots, even if quantum effects mean that our behavior is not strictly deterministic. There's no shame or embarrassment in realizing this. But our experience includes, at least sometimes, the subjective qualia of being able to choose. That is what free will is. You see what I mean? It's real, it's just not real in the objective world. I thought about these problems for many years. At this point, I simply cannot see any other way of putting things together and moving forward with this huge problem of science, pseudoscience, superstition, religion. Let me close with this thought by the 19th century French philosopher Auguste Comte. He said, "Nothing is destroyed until it is replaced." So if there's stuff in the world that you see that's bad, you'd like to see destroyed, realize it's going to have to be replaced with something. You have to build the replacement before the destruction can happen. And once we do that, everybody's going to be happy that we destroyed the bad thing. You see how it connects? We're not going to get rid of the bad religion unless we replace it with good religion. This is something Einstein said, related. The significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. That's what Einstein did. People were stuck. And he's made a few. Gesundheit, Gesundheit. You always have to say that. Don't say that first.
So this is like a little bit like another observation of Einstein to the effect that insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. What sensible people have been doing for a very long time to try to solve the problem of superstition and the religions that encourage it has not been working very well. We must adopt another approach. We must try something else. So what do you think? I worried a little bit about some of this. I thought, ooh, it's going to offend atheists because they hate religion. But you have to reframe it, you see. You have to realize what they're doing is wrong, but part of the solution, the main part of the solution is we must do it right. So, certainly would like to hear your thoughts. I hope you have a lot of thoughts in the coming days, weeks, and months about this.
Seems to me if you're going to have a religion, though, you've got to have certain things, that these are the things that we do or do not believe. And of course, being a free thinker, everyone has different thoughts. So I don't know how in the world it can be a structured type of religion to actually invent a religion that's atheism.
But that's why you have to reframe it. It's not just atheism or reincarnationism. There's lots of things we don't believe in. Leprechauns, on and on and on. You know, there's not even a word for not believing in leprechauns. I guess make it up. Leprechaunism. Why do you have to believe things? Come on, folks, we've talked about this. Is it really necessary to believe in anything? Isn't it better to know what facts are and possible ways of putting those facts together? Things that, in order to recognize what is worthy or sensible to believe, but we have to hold our beliefs with a very light grasp because they could be wrong.
But we have to have use some sort of subjective type of thinking.
You remember our creed, what we aspire to? I had to put it up again, but, you know, pay attention to facts and reason, put those together as best you can. That's where morality comes from too. It doesn't come from God. We are so lucky that we don't have Neanderthals still alive. Because if there was another breed of human that really was very different, you know, that had no moral sense, let's say, we'd be in trouble. What if there was there are no races, we know that, biologically. But what if there was a race that was like 10-year-olds? What kind of society would we have? Or suppose that humans were different in the sense that there was sexual dimorphism. Sexual dimorphism exists in many species. So, for example, in some insects, the female is this great big thing and the male is this tiny little thing, because, of course, all he has to do is impregnate the female. What if humans were like that? What if women were all like they are now, but men were all these, like, sessile rocks with a penis sticking up, and when the women wanted to get pregnant, they just go get on?
Sounds good.
Okay, so there's women that think that that's how we are. Point is that the reason for having respect for the rights of women as equally as men is there is not any kind of difference that you can show that makes a difference. Now, don't tell anybody, but any left-handed people here? It's been found, you know, that left-handed people are slightly more intelligent than right-handed people.
Yes, they are. That's true. They're more
Seriously.
talented. They're more talented too.
Seriously, I mean, if left-handedness caused a little blue light to be blinking here to where you could easily spot people, they would all know who each other is. They could get together and rule the world. Fortunately, it's a kind of a hidden trait, and yet it's far more important than almost any other physical trait you can think of. You know, hair color, eye color, skin shade, whatever. Handedness really goes to how your brain works. David, you had something to say?
Well, I mean, what is the reason they give for that?
Nobody knows.
It could be that left-handed people just have to learn to adapt in more situations because the world is designed for right-handed people. So that ability to adapt translates into being more intelligent.
Maybe.
Just because they're forced to. But I'm just saying that.
Right. And you notice how so many discussions, here's an example, where immediately we're falling into the nature-nurture debate. Is it something that, like you say, a left-handed person has to learn to cope in a right-handed world, and so they're more mentally agile and adaptable? But we do know that there's actual brain difference too, and that you can show from birth.
The key,
Isn't it supposedly true, though, that of course one side of your brain has the creative and the other side has the other? And so when your left-handedness is accessing the creative part of your brain. So that's how you would be creative with left-handed people.
Yeah, and I realize that that's a popular meme. I'm not sure how accurate it is in the light of the last 10 to 20 years in which, brain research, brain neuroscience has made tremendous advances, just like this eDNA. There's so many things where progress has been made. I could show you an article in Science magazine recently where they're making nanometer-sized little geometric shapes and then making them self-assemble into these tremendous patterns. I mean, you look at these pictures like, holy crap, how do they do that? And they're going to find uses for that. So if you think you know science, I'm telling you, if you knew the details that the scientists do. But see, here's the cool thing about science is you can leave astronomy to the astronomers, you can leave biology to biologists, but everybody has qualia. Everybody has that task. And that's why, in a way, religion has a bigger, more complicated task. And I haven't even scratched the surface of where you could go with this, too. First of all, there's going to be idiots who will say that qualia prove that all of existence is in the mind. The Deepak Chopras of the world. But I'd rather have Deepak Chopras than Jerry Falwell's. Wouldn't you? Right? They're not nearly as harmful.
the key
But
word,
I don't think religion needs to have doctrines and dogmas that everybody must believe. But I think it's important to realize in your own life what your qualia, what you've learned from your qualia. I mean, we all have our own interests. I mean, some of us are, how many are going to be watching the Super Bowl? Is the Super Bowl already started? I don't know.
5:30.
No, not till later on. But in other words, look at how different we all are. Not so much in our physical characteristics, but in our interests, the way we think about life and love. And the cool thing about that, too, is you can change over time. These religions where they just ossify and, it's like a fly in amber, where they can't change. They won't change, and change to them means, that means we must have been mistaken then. Whereas Freethought as a religion says, it's good to realize that you're mistaken. But when you realize you're mistaken, you don't have to stay mistaken like before you knew you were mistaken. Now you can change and get better. That's progress. That should be a feature of religion, not just of science.
when you talk about that fact about left-handedness, the key word to always remember is statistically, because all too often you hear little facts like presented like that is an excuse to put people into categories, into buckets, and to treat them differently.
Very true.
You know,
That's also true with gender differences.
Right.
The fact that most women can't do the physical duty of firemen to drag these hoses around and things like that doesn't mean that none of them are, and so on.
Tim, I don't know if you may have covered this and I missed it, but the etymology of religion, the word religion and the word church, can you talk to that?
Well, the etymology of religion means to bind or rebind. It's really tough to know what that relates to, but it's speculated that it has to do with being obligated to behave in a certain way in society and culture. And that's where a lot of the rituals of traditional religions came from. In fact, there's stuff out there where people say that the founders of the mainline religions probably were obsessive compulsives, had to wash their hands 10 times a day and do their offerings and sacrifices and things like that. But again, I don't think the etymology really relates to what religion ought to be. Do you know?
What about church? What's the basis for the word?
Again, I am not really that familiar with it, but ask yourself what church is today. It's an organization. It's a unit of social organization. It's intermediate between the family and the larger society. And the thing that creates it is not like an interest in birds like the Audubon Society. It is a sharing of core values and interests having to do really with qualia, doesn't it?
So you see, actually, you are putting a certain structure there for the
Of
Church
course.
of Atheism as far as having your core values that you are expressing. It's not just everyone going off with a different type of value system.
Well, it's a toolbox in a way also. I mean, think about Buddhism, which teaches that the way to happiness is not to have desires. I tried to explain that to one of my kids once, and she thought I was telling her not to have any ambitions.
Well, same.
But what they do say is that you should not hold your happiness hostage to what you want.
Right.
That's really,
Be happy in spite of, not because of.
whatever you are. And I remember reading a little quote from the Dalai Lama guy, who made a very, this just goes straight to the heart of religion being about qualia. He said, each one of us is, and you have to think about it, you're not anything but an experiencing consciousness. Now, next month, we're going to talk about thought and a little more about how our brains work. Run through the rest of the slides here. How are we doing on time, by the way? Is that giving you enough to think about? Who else has a burning lot? Is this showing why religion and church is important? We don't want to be frozen out. We want to be in the mainstream. We want to show people what to do. And like I said, there's lots of religions that have this. Even in Christianity, you know, there's such a thing as Christian atheism. How many people have heard about that? There was a whole God is dead movement within Christianity to try to de-emphasize God. Because the fact of the matter is, all this supernatural stuff distracts from the task of trying to make sense of your life. And the scientists are going to make sense of all that kind of stuff, but you have to make sense of your life, your relationships, the things that have happened to you, what's made you happy, what's made you unhappy. It's like all those sayings about everywhere you go, there you are. Now, there's all kinds of things like that. That's what religion is. It's just nobody's really systematized it, put it together in a single toolbox. But that's what needs to happen. And I think a lot more could happen if people started focusing on it and thinking about it in those terms, instead of keep beating their heads against the wall of you have to have faith in God. God's going to fix everything. God will never give you too much to handle. How many people have seen people dealing with stuff that's too much to handle? Yeah.
I think one of the most important things that church should mean would be to have a sense of community. And that's what I feel like people actually find a difference in going into a particular church. And this was
Well, and that goes to what you're saying about there's something, common have to believe in. I don't think there's anything we all have to believe in, but I think we all have to understand that we're trying to do the same thing. We're trying to be happy in life. We're trying to do what's right instead of what is the most comfortable or the most convenient. We're trying to be good people. We're trying to be the people that we would like to be, the kind of people that we can admire. To go through life without regrets, so that everything we do, at least we can look back and say, I did the best I could at the time.
And that probably isn't true.
We change over time.
I know, but
Yeah.
I'm saying, I think that if you're honest with yourself, you can look back and surely something you've done that you could have made a different choice than you knew at the time you could.
And all these ideas are kind of like the low-hanging fruit of making sense of qualia. And the problem is, each of us only has one lifetime to get as much figured out as we can. I'm going to read that thing you gave me, Merlin, about the body that you're given, the lessons. You'll like it. Whatever you've got in Merlin's thing, we could to add next time.
Tim, I guess one thing, one of the recent podcasts from You're Not So Smart, I know I've mentioned it before, one of my favorites, one of the things they talked about pretty recently was kind of something you touched on, whether you know something or you believe in it.
Right.
And like a ridiculous example is, how do you know the moon isn't made of cheese, right? You're not going to go there, right? So some things you have to believe, and I remember it basically touches on you really have to choose wisely the things you place your trust in. And that fine line between knowing and believing.
I don't know if you were at the church service where we talked about what you really know.
Right.
In law, if they put you on the stand and they ask you who's the leader of North Korea, you're not allowed to answer because it's hearsay. You don't know that the leader of North Korea is this Kim Jong-un guy. It's just what you read in the newspaper. When you testify in court, you're to testify to things that you personally know. And things like what the moon's made of. I know what scientists say that they found. I have no reason to distrust them and so on. That's right. But what you do know that nobody can argue with is your own qualia. how you felt when something happened, or you were at a particular place, or your parents said this or did that. Those things that imprint themselves on us and become a part of who we are. But that doesn't mean we're not in control of it either. And that's what religion should do, is give us some sense of control. It's like when you're a child, you don't really have that, and as you get older, you realize you can reprogram yourself. That's what religion ought to do. Not tell us fantasy, fairy tales about the world out there that we already got a handle on. We don't need them telling us, oh, well, here's how things were created. We got that figured out.
But they're taught that they'll go to hell if they don't
Yeah, isn't that sad?
just accept.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I would say what we should promulgate is the idea that hell is being on this earth and not appreciating what it is to be a human being. Not having some sense of how to deal with the human condition and how to not get out of it, but how to grapple with the human predicament.
But religion has a financial stake in it.
Sure, there's,
Yeah.
So
Sure,
they don't
there's-
want to change.
sure, well, those people.
Right.
But there are lots of advocates for different things that are not right. I mean, look at the anti-vaxxers. We've known for years that that's all based on a lie. This Andrew Wakefield guy who first said that vaccines cause autism was fake news, you know, that he made the crap up. He wrote a book and he got famous, he went and talked and made a lot of money on it. You think the people that are in that, you think the people that are putting on conferences on UFOs and aliens visiting the earth, you think they're gonna just give that all up because it's stupid? There's always gonna be,
Not if they're making money.
there's always gonna be stupidity, and money is always gonna, you know, there's always gonna be money there for people doing that. You know, medical quackery's been an interest of mine, many of you know that. This stuff's not gonna go away, but we have to, it doesn't mean you don't struggle against it. When people have a chronic disease, you don't say, oh, well, it's never gonna get better, so off you go and die. No. Try to manage it as best you can. And you can't do everything at once either. So, here's where I beg for some money. Remember, you're gonna get birthday cake back there. Nobody brought that. I think each piece is worth at least $10. Give us your generous tax deductible donation, those